They said it was just a shelter. A small place on the reef where fishermen could rest when the weather turned bad. Nothing serious. In the mid-1990s, the world was told that China was only building fishermen's shelters on a remote reef in the West Philippine Sea. Today, that shelter is a major military base, with a long runway, missile systems, and radar inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Mischief Reef, Panganiban Reef to Filipinos, lies about 130 nautical miles west of Palawan, well inside the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. From China's coast, it is more than 1,000 kilometers away. Legally, it sits on the Philippines' continental shelf. Only the Philippines has the right to build there and use the resources. Early 1995, Filipino fishermen report something new at Panganiban Reef. Armed personnel and unfamiliar constructions rising out of the lagoon. Reconnaissance flights confirm it. On top of steel and wooden stilts sit octagonal huts with the flag of the People's Republic of China. The Ramos administration protests. How can another country build structures without permission on a reef inside the Philippine EEZ? Beijing replies, "These are only shelters for Chinese fishermen. Civilian, non-military," they say. They even claim that Filipino fishermen are also welcome to use them. Across Southeast Asia, few are convinced. ASEAN issues a statement expressing serious concern. Analysts call it creeping expansion in the South China Sea. The supposed shelters do not remain simple for long. By 1998 to 1999, aerial images show big concrete facilities. A pier about 300 meters long, barracks, even a probable command center. A pattern becomes clear. First, buoys and markers. Then, temporary wooden shelters. Then, permanent concrete buildings. From 2013 to 2015, the reef was transformed again. China carries out massive land reclamation, pouring sand and rock over the coral. In just a few years, an artificial island of roughly 558 to 590 hectares appeared where there used to be only water and reef. A man-made platform the size of a small city. Today, Mischief Reef is a full-fledged military base. A runway of about 3 kilometers, hardened hangars and storage, deep harbors for ships, and layered radar and communications systems. Open-source reports point to the deployment of HQ-9 or HQ-9B surface-to-air missiles, YJ-12B anti-ship cruise missiles, gun batteries, and jamming equipment. Weapons that can threaten ships and aircraft far across the West Philippine Sea. What began as a fisherman's shelter has become, in effect, an unsinkable missile and air base, positioned inside the Philippines' own maritime zone. In 2016, an international tribunal in The Hague issued its ruling on the case filed by the Philippines. The tribunal ruled that Mischief Reef is a low-tide elevation within the Philippines' EEZ and continental shelf. It cannot be claimed as sovereign territory. And China's construction of artificial islands and facilities there, without Philippine consent, breached the Philippines' sovereign rights. This is not just a legal dispute on paper. It affects fishing grounds, energy resources, and the security of millions who depend on these waters. Today, we hear similar language in areas within the Philippines' lawful maritime entitlements. Terms like China's Huangyandao National Nature Reserve, Marine Park, or purely civilian facilities around features such as Scarborough Shoal. Mischief Reef is a warning. Once structures go up, they are hard to roll back. Once a shelter becomes a base, it changes the balance of power, the law on the water, and the lives of those who fish there. We have seen this lie before. Civilian cover leading to permanent military control. They called it a shelter. They built a base. The next time we hear, "It's just civilian," we should remember Panganiban and ask what it could become tomorrow. But Mischief Reef was not the beginning. Before the fisherman's shelter came another promise, a harmless weather station on a reef far from China's own coast. In Episode 2, we go back to 1987, to Fiery Cross Reef, where it all started as science.
Military aircraft. This is Chinese Navy. You are approaching our military alert zone.
When we hear scientific research or climate monitoring, we think of science, data, and work for the common good. No guns, no missiles. Kagitingan Reef, Yongshu Jiao, internationally known as Fiery Cross Reef. It was presented as a harmless weather and sea level station. But, like other reefs in the West Philippine Sea, the story didn't end there. Kagitingan Reef is part of the Spratly Islands in the middle of the South China Sea. It is far from mainland China, over 1,000 kilometers from Hainan, but much closer to Vietnam's coast and to Palawan. It's a small reef that almost disappears underwater at high tide. Yet, because of its location, whoever controls it can influence the whole region: Vietnam, the Philippines, and key shipping lanes that pass nearby. In 1987, at a UNESCO IOC meeting, Chinese scientists proposed Yongshu Jiao as a site for the Global Sea Level Observing System, or GLOS. On paper, the goal was simple: measure sea level rise for climate and ocean research. To most people, it sounded technical: tide gauges, data, science. But Kagitingan Reef was not some neutral point on a map. It was part of the Spratlys claimed by multiple nations, yet listed as if it were a normal part of China's coastline. While Scientific Station was written in the documents, something very different played out at sea. On March 14, 1988, at Johnson South Reef, just a few miles from Kagitingan, Chinese and Vietnamese forces clashed. In that brief fight on the reef, dozens of Vietnamese sailors were killed. Records say at least 64 lives were lost. After the battle, Chinese ships and troops stayed on several reefs in the Union Banks, including Kagitingan Reef itself. On paper, the story was science. On the water, what changed was who controlled the area. After the clash, Beijing went ahead with construction on Kagitingan. From February to August 1988, they built a small station, a concrete platform, radar and weather instruments, and basic living quarters. For many years, that's all most photos showed: a modest building in the middle of the sea. Former Justice Antonio Carpio later noted that hardly anyone protested because it looked like a harmless radar weather station. But while the world stayed quiet, the footprint slowly grew. More buildings, a longer pier, more antennas, quietly turning into a permanent outpost. In 2014, the scale changed completely. China began large-scale land reclamation on Kagetingan Reef. In just about 2 years, a reef that was nearly underwater at high tide became an artificial island of roughly 274 hectares, bigger than some natural islands in the Spratlys. By early 2016, the build-out was effectively complete. A runway more than 3,000 meters long, a harbor for ships, and full radar and communications facilities. What started as a weather station had clearly turned into an air and naval base. The changes on Kagetingan didn't stop there. By 2016 to 2018, shelters for surface-to-air and anti-ship missiles appeared. For many analysts, Kagetingan had become part of the Big Three militarized reefs, together with Mischief, Panganiban, and Subi. From 2023 to 2025, another layer was added. Rows of monopole antennas, paved pads, and vehicles carrying electronic warfare systems. These systems can monitor, jam, and target communications and radar across a large part of the South China Sea. In simple terms, Kagetingan is now an airbase, a missile platform, and an electronic warfare hub in the middle of vital shipping lanes. In 2016, the Arbitral Tribunal in The Hague ruled that Kagetingan Reef is a rock, not an island. It cannot create its own exclusive economic zone, only up to 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. Even though it lies outside the Philippine EEZ, the base there still matters. Together with Mischief and Subi, it can watch movements across the West Philippine Sea and project power in ways that fishermen and ships in the area feel every day. The story of Kagetingan Reef, Fiery Cross Reef, is not just about one reef. It became a template. First comes scientific research and weather station, then a small station. Later, concrete buildings, a pier, and more troops. In the end, reclamation, runway, missiles, and electronic warfare. The same pattern appeared at Mischief Reef. So, in the West Philippine Sea, when we hear new labels like scientific research, monitoring station, or environmental project, we can't just trust the words. We have to look at what is actually happening on the water and ask what a small station today could turn into tomorrow. Fiery Cross began with science and became a fortress. Scarborough started as a routine fisheries inspection and ended as a gray zone takeover. In Episode 3, we watch how Bajo de Masinloc was lost without a single shot fired.
Command, this is Gregorio del Pilar. We have 8 Chinese fishing vessels inside the lagoon of Bajo de Masinloc. The boarding party reports giant clams, corals, live sharks on board, preparing to tow the vessels. Wait, 2 large white ships approaching the mouth. Chinese marine surveillance. They're ordering us to leave. They're blocking the exit. This was supposed to be a routine fisheries law enforcement mission, but over the next 2 months, it turned into a full standoff and ended with the Philippines losing control of Bajo de Masinloc, internationally known as Scarborough Shoal, without a single shot being fired. Bajo de Masinloc, Calburo to many Filipino fishermen, is a shallow reef with a lagoon only about 120 nautical miles from the coast of Zambales, well inside the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. From Hainan in China, it is almost 600 nautical miles away. It is much closer to Filipino fishermen than to any Chinese port. But today, it is guarded by another country's ships. April 8th to 10th, 2012. A Philippine Navy surveillance aircraft spots 8 Chinese fishing vessels inside the lagoon of Bajo de Masinloc. The Navy sends BRP Gregorio del Pilar to investigate. Boarding teams go vessel to vessel. They find piles of giant clams, harvested corals, and live sharks in the holds, all illegal under Philippine law, and clearly inside the Philippine EEZ. On paper, it is a straightforward fisheries enforcement case. No shots, no war, just law on the water. Until the white ships arrive. While the Philippines prepares to seize the offending vessels, Beijing responds, not in court, but at sea. 2 China marine surveillance ships, Haijian 75 and Haijian 84, arrive and position themselves at the mouth of the lagoon. A China fisheries law enforcement vessel joins them soon after. From the radio, the message is clear.
This is China Marine Surveillance Ship number 117. Please start your ship. Leave this sea. Your vessel has entered the area under the jurisdiction of the People's Republic of China and leave the area immediately.
In an instant, the exit is blocked. The Philippine Navy's flagship can no longer tow the Chinese fishing boats out. April to May 2012. This is no longer just a boarding operation. It has become a maritime tug-of-war. On the Philippine side, BRP Gregorio del Pilar at first, then smaller Coast Guard and Bureau of Fisheries vessels, plus a few Filipino fishing boats. On the Chinese side, more marine surveillance ships, the Yuzheng 303 and other fisheries law enforcement vessels, and over 30 fishing militia boats inside and around the lagoon. At the peak of the standoff, there are 6 to 7 Chinese government ships facing only 2 or 3 Philippine vessels. On flags, it looks like a standoff. On numbers and size, it is one-sided. While ships stare at each other down at sea, the confrontation moves into the halls of diplomacy. In Manila, the Department of Foreign Affairs summons the Chinese ambassador and files a formal diplomatic protest. They publicly stated that Scarborough Shoal is part of Philippine territory, that the Philippines is prepared to defend its sovereignty, and that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea supports the Philippine position. At the same time, the United States steps in as mediator. On the sidelines of regional meetings, a way out is proposed. A mutual withdrawal. All vessels from both sides will leave the area to de-escalate. June 2012. Through mediators, both sides agree in principle. All ships will withdraw. On the Philippine side, the decision is clear. President Aquino orders the Navy ship to pull back, and later, even the remaining Coast Guard vessels, a gesture of good faith to de-escalate the crisis. From June into early July, Philippine ships leave the area one by one. But one side does not follow through. Chinese marine surveillance ships remain on station. By July, they are the only state vessels guarding the mouth of the lagoon. They promised to leave. We left. They stayed. That's how we lost Scarborough. Signed a constant presence at Bajo de Masinloc since 2012, Chinese Coast Guard ships have maintained. They sit at the entrance of the lagoon and decide who can enter. Filipino fishermen feel it first. Radio warnings telling them to leave, blocking maneuvers in front of their boats, and in recent years, repeated water cannon incidents against Philippine vessels near the shoal. In 2025, Beijing announced a Huangyan Island National Nature Reserve at Scarborough Shoal, A nature reserve in what has long been one of the Philippines' traditional fishing grounds, only 120 nautical miles from Luzon. What happened at Bajo de Masinloc in 2012 was the original gray zone seizure. It started as a simple fisheries law enforcement action, was met by a larger, coordinated deployment of government and militia vessels, moved into diplomacy and a promise of mutual withdrawal, and ended with only one side actually leaving. No declaration of war, no missiles fired, but control of a reef just 120 nautical miles from Luzon quietly changed hands. Today, when we hear proposals for nature reserves, joint protection, or new civilian facilities in our waters, we need to remember. At Scarborough, it wasn't just a reef we lost. It was a piece of our future at sea, taken through presence, pressure, and staying power. They promised to leave. We left. They stayed. If we do not want what happened at Bajo de Masinloc to be repeated in other parts of the West Philippine Sea, we have to be more watchful, more united, and more willing to stand firm on what is clearly ours. In 2012, Scarborough was taken without a shot. Presence, pressure, and a broken promise to withdraw. 13 years later, the same reef is suddenly called a National Nature Reserve. In Episode 4, we ask, how did a traditional Filipino fishing ground become a so-called park under someone else's flag?
Episode 4 explores China's 2025 proclamation of a marine nature reserve within the Philippines' lawful maritime entitlements at Scarborough Shoal. For nearly 40 years, expansion in the South China Sea has come wrapped in soft language. A weather station on a remote reef, a shelter for fishermen. Now at Scarborough Shoal, Bajo de Masinloc, Calburo to Filipino fishers. A brand new label, a national nature reserve. Different words, same trajectory. What looks like conservation on paper is, in practice, a way to harden control over a traditional Filipino fishing ground. One that an international tribunal has already said must not be blocked. In September 2025, China's State Council announced a new designation, the Huangyan Island National Nature Reserve. On paper, it sounds benign. Official language speaks of protecting fragile marine ecosystems, standardized management, scientific research and monitoring, and public education on environmental protection. It reads like any other conservation document, but Scarborough Shoal does not sit off the coast of China. It lies about 120 nautical miles from Luzon, well inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, and more than 500 nautical miles from Hainan. What Beijing calls a nature reserve sits on top of another country's fishing ground. On paper, it's protection. On the water, it's a blockade. Since 2012, Chinese government vessels have controlled the mouth of the lagoon at Calburo. Filipino fishermen who once sheltered there now describe a routine of radio warnings telling them to leave, large ships blocking their path, and in recent years, water cannon blasts aimed at Philippine boats near the shoal. The people being kept out of this new nature reserve are the same communities that have fished here for generations. The nature reserve story also hides an uncomfortable truth. Much of the damage at Scarborough Shoal was caused under China's watch. For years, giant clam harvesting and destructive methods, propellers chopping into coral, heavy gear dragged across the reef, have shredded the lagoon's ecosystem. Marine scientists estimate that hundreds of hectares of coral and habitat around the shoal have been severely damaged, with knock-on effects for fish stocks and for Filipino fishers who depend on Calburo as a traditional fishing ground. The same state now claiming to protect Huangyan stood by as large-scale extraction tore up the very reef it says it is saving. So why call it a national nature reserve? The label does more than sound good abroad. It creates a legal-sounding excuse to keep others out. Under this narrative, any foreign boat, even a small Filipino fishing bangka, can be painted as a threat to the environment. Blocking them is no longer framed as an illegal blockade, but as enforcing reserve regulations. In this way, brute control is dressed up as orderly, rules-based management. What international rulings have called unlawful interference is rebranded as environmental law enforcement inside a Chinese protected area. But the legal reality hasn't changed. In 2016, an arbitral tribunal in The Hague ruled that Scarborough Shoal is a traditional fishing ground for Filipino, Chinese, and other regional fishers, and that China's blocking and dangerous maneuvers against Philippine vessels there are unlawful under the law of the sea. The tribunal also rejected the so-called 9-dash line as having no legal basis to override the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. No new label, whether security zone or nature reserve, can erase that decision. From Fiery Cross to Mischief to Scarborough, the wording keeps changing, but the direction stays the same. First, a weather station, then a fisherman's shelter, now a national nature reserve. Each soft phrase leads to harder facts on the water: runways, radars, blockades, and the slow exclusion of Filipino fishers from their own traditional grounds. Environmental language should never become camouflage for occupation. Bajo de Masinloc, Calburo, is not a Chinese nature park. It is a lifeline for coastal communities in Luzon, and a test of whether law or labels will define the future of the West Philippine Sea. When we hear new promises of protection or reserve in disputed waters, we need to remember what has already happened at Scarborough and look beyond the label to the reality on the sea. In Episode 5, we look at what happens if Scarborough is built up next and how that could complete a triangle of bases reaching toward Luzon in the Bashi Channel.
Episode 5 asks a simple question. What happens if that triangle is completed? Look at the map from above. One militarized reef here, another there, and a third to the north. Fiery Cross. Mischief. Subi. For years, analysts have called them China's Big Three outposts in the Spratlys, each with a long runway, harbor, radars, and missiles. Now add one more point. Scarborough Shoal. Bajo de Masinloc, Calburo to Filipino fishers, only about 120 nautical miles from Luzon. Connect those points, and a triangle appears over the West Philippine Sea. First, what already exists. On Fiery Cross Reef, China has built an artificial island with a runway over 3,000 meters long, hangars, a deep harbor, radars, and hardened shelters for mobile missile launchers. On Mischief Reef, inside the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, there is another long runway, gun and missile positions, and extensive radar and communications systems. On Subi Reef, just a short distance from Pagasa Island, a third major base mirrors the same pattern: airstrip, harbor, sensors, and suspected air defense and anti-ship systems. Together, these three outposts already form a chain of what some analysts call unsinkable aircraft carriers in the Spratlys. Scarborough Shoal, Bajo de Masinloc, Calburo, is different from the Spratly Reefs in two important ways. First, it is close. The shoal is roughly 120 to 124 nautical miles west of Zambales, well inside the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. Second, it has long been a traditional fishing ground and storm refuge for Filipino, Chinese, and other regional fishers, a role noted in the 2016 arbitral ruling. If heavy radar or missiles are ever placed at Scarborough, they would sit roughly 240 kilometers off Luzon's coast, within reach of the sea lanes and air corridors that support Manila and the main logistics routes feeding the capital. Now, imagine the triangle as a network. To the south and west, Fiery Cross, Mischief, and Subi already host runways, surface-to-air and anti-ship missile shelters, and new antenna fields believed to support electronic warfare and surveillance systems. To the north and east, Scarborough guards the approach to Luzon and sits near the routes that lead toward the Bashi Channel, the narrow gap between Taiwan and the Philippines that many experts describe as one of the most critical choke points in any future conflict over Taiwan. If Beijing were ever to build permanent facilities at Scarborough, analysts warn it could help. Link up radars and sensors into a wider air-sea picture. Support a potential air defense identification zone over parts of the northern South China Sea, and place additional pressure on shipping and air routes that matter to Manila, to the US-Philippines alliance, and to Taiwan's southern flank. In that scenario, the triangle would not just cover reefs, it would lean over the main island of Luzon. But the triangle is not just about maps and missile ranges. Its impact is already felt on small boats with no radars at all. Since 2012, Filipino fishers at Calburo have faced constant presence by Chinese Coast Guard ships, blocking, shadowing, and, in recent years, repeated water cannon incidents against Philippine vessels near the shoal. If the nature reserve label is used to justify even tighter control, those same communities risk being pushed further away from their own traditional fishing grounds, while larger powers debate stability and order on paper. The triangle is not yet closed. There are still choices to be made. Some of the most important tools are not military at all. First, transparency. Public documentation of water cannon incidents, near collisions, and illegal fishing or reef destruction helps strip away soft labels like reserve or shelter and show what is really happening at sea. Second, the law. UNCLOS and the 2016 award remain a legal baseline. Scarborough lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, and blocking lawful fishing and navigation there has already been found unlawful. Third, partnerships. Joint patrols, capacity building, and exercises near key routes, including areas connected to the Bashi Channel, signal that the Philippines is not alone in defending a rules-based order. Fourth, guarding the information space. The same soft language we see at sea also appears on land, in business forums, community events, student groups, and online campaigns that repeat talking points about win-win cooperation or just protecting the environment, while staying silent about harassment and blockades in the West Philippine Sea. Analysts describe some of this as united front work. Efforts linked to Beijing that try to shape how other societies think, speak, and stay quiet about issues like Scarborough Shoal. Learning to recognize these patterns is part of protecting our own national conversation. And finally, support for fishermen. Presence missions, fuel and gear assistance, and simple tools like cameras and trackers help coastal communities stay visible, safer, and part of the story, not pushed out of it. Across this series, we have followed one long line. Fiery Cross, 1987, a weather station for sea level research. Mischief, 1995, fishermen's shelters on stilts. Scarborough, 2012, a mutual withdrawal that only one side followed. Scarborough, 2025, a national nature reserve declared over a shared fishing ground. 4 phrases, 4 turning points, 1 pattern. In the past, the world often failed to recognize that pattern until it was too late. Today, Filipinos and our partners can see it more clearly, not only in the structures built at sea, but also in the narratives pushed on land, in our media, and in our communities. From Fiery Cross to Mischief to Scarborough, the pattern is clear. Soft labels, hard control. What happens next at Bajo de Masinloc isn't a surprise anymore, it's a choice. Whether law or labels rule these waters will depend on all of us.